For 3 years, I was a vampire lord's contract spouse. Tonight, he erased my name from the world. To the High Sanguine Council, I was a dreg. A fringe blood with an essence so thin it was considered a birth defect. On paper, I was the spouse of the great vampire lord Valeria. In truth, I was a political placeholder kept alive by his mercy. I leaned over the kitchen's obsidian counter, my fingers white-knuckled as I gripped the edge. I was supposed to be preparing Valeria's evening draft, a delicate blend of preserved essence and rare night-blooming herbs. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The pain wasn't a physical sickness. It felt like liquid silver was being injected directly into my marrow. I had been told since I was a child that I suffered from soul wither, that my fringe blood heart was too small to hold its own life force. That was the basis of our contract. Valeria provided the anchor energy to keep my soul from shattering. And in exchange, I gave him my absolute submission. But tonight, the anchor was failing. A searing heat started at the base of my spine and radiated outward, making my very skin vibrate with a frequency that felt like it was trying to rip me apart. Just a few more minutes, I whispered to the empty room, my voice a dry rasp. Outside, the storm clawed at the tall windows, but the thrumming in my chest was louder than the thunder. It was a rhythmic pulse. Thump, 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 but it was out of sync with my own heartbeat. It was faster, stronger, it felt ancient. "Enrick!" The voice cut through the house like a lash. I flinched, the sudden movement sending a spike of agony through my abdomen that made me cry out and collapse onto the floor. I staggered to my feet, leaning on the furniture to crawl my way into the grand foyer. Standing before a massive gilded mirror was Lord Valyria. He was the definition of vampire nobility. Tall, elegant, his skin like winter marble. He was currently adjusting a silver brooch at his throat, his midnight silk coat embroidered with the silver thorns of his coven. Valyria!" I gasped, leaning heavily against a marble pillar. "Please, the soul wither. It's worse. I need the anchor ritual, my essence. It's burning me." Valeria didn't turn around. He remained fixed on his own reflection. "The sanguine convocation begins in less than an hour, Enrick," he said, his voice cold and flat. "The council is conducting the tri-annual audit of houses tonight. I cannot arrive with a fringe blood spouse who cannot even hold his own form together." "This isn't a performance," I stumbled forward, reaching out a hand that trembled violently. "If you don't anchor me tonight, my soul will drift. Valyria, for 3 years, I have been your loyal shadow. Does my life mean nothing to you?" He finally looked at me, his storm-gray eyes filled with clinical irritation. "You dregs are so dreadfully fragile. It is likely just a side effect of the bond. You've become resistant to my anchor. It happens." "I can't breathe," I whispered, falling to my knees. A pulse of violet light flickered briefly in the back of my eyes, but I was too weak to notice. Valeria pulled on his black leather gloves. "The driver will drop you at the district clinic. Go to Dr. Thomas. Let him give you some stabilizing herbs. Do not ruin my standing tonight with your dramatic flair. The High Elders are looking for any sign of weakness in House Vane." "You're leaving me?" My voice was small, trembling with a heartbreak that hurt more than the silver in my veins. "You provided the energy to keep my heart beating, and I provided the partner you needed for the council's marriage requirements. If you leave now, I won't last the night." He leaned down, his face stopping inches from mine. "We have a contract, Enrick. Clause 4. Your presence is for my political convenience. If your essence is too defective to be anchored, then you are a broken tool. We are not equals." The heavy oak door slammed shut. I lay on the cold marble floor as the engine of Valeria's luxury vehicle roared to life and faded into the rain. He was leaving me to shatter because I was no longer useful. The clinic was a place of gray stone and secrets. Dr. Thomas, an Imperial physician in exile, held a vial of my blood, and his hands were shaking. He was a man who had seen the true heights of sanguine power before the purge, and the look in his eyes was one of sheer awe. "Enrick," he whispered, "you don't have soul wither. You never did." I felt the world tilt. What? But the palpitations, the burning. "It isn't a defect," Thomas said, his voice trembling. "It's an awakening. You're carrying a child, Enrick, but it isn't a fringe blood. The energy readings, they are sovereign." I stared at him, my breath hitching. I tried to laugh, but it was a jagged sound. "Sovereign? Thomas, stop. The Imperial line was extinguished 22 years ago. I'm a dreg. My essence is thin. Everyone has told me that since I was born." "Valeria's anchor energy wasn't healing you, Enrick," Thomas revealed, his eyes urgent. "It was a suppression curse. It was a lead weight meant to keep your Imperial blood from ever waking up. He wasn't keeping you alive. He was keeping you silent. But the child spark is too powerful. It is shattering the cage from the inside out." "Imperial," I repeated. The word felt too large for my mouth. If he was right, then my entire life, the shame of being a fringe blood, was a carefully constructed prison. As I struggled to wrap my mind around it, a terminal on his desk chimed, a red light with the council seal. "Lord Valyria has just filed his registry," Thomas said quietly. "He has formally petitioned to dissolve your marital contract, citing asset obsolescence. And look here, he has registered a new sponsor, Lord Mir of the Southern Coven." Valeria hadn't even waited for me to shatter before replacing me. He had used a curse to keep me weak, and then discarded me for the very weakness he created. I stood up, the violet light in my eyes flaring with the first spark of true rage. I walked out of the clinic and into the pouring rain. I wandered into a dark alleyway, my legs finally giving out. Suddenly, 3 shadows detached themselves from the darkness, rogue vampires, smelling of cheap blood ale. "Look at this," one of them sneered. "A runaway dreg. I bet your blood tastes like watered-down wine." They closed in. I tried to crawl away, my hand shielding my stomach. "Please, not for me, for the child." The leader laughed, reaching for my throat. "Lord Valyria won't miss a broken toy." He yanked my head back. In that moment of absolute terror, the liquid silver in my veins reached a boiling point. The violet light in my eyes erupted. A shockwave of deep purple energy exploded from my body. A pillar of ancient, sovereign power that hit the alley like a blast from a furnace. The thugs were thrown backward, their bodies slamming into the brick walls, paralyzed by an aura so heavy the stones began to crack. I gasped, my vision swimming in violet light. At that exact moment, the roar of a dozen engines filled the street. Black limousines bearing the silver dragon crest of the Imperial Primal screeched to a halt. Imperial paladins in black chrome armor marched in, forming a wall of steel around me. And then, a man stepped out. The high primal manicore took one step forward. Then he stopped. His hands hovered in the rain, trembling, as if he were afraid the moment would break if he touched it. "Enrick," he whispered. "My baby," he breathed. "My little star." My vision swam. "Don't," I rasped. "Don't say that. I'm just a dreg. I don't know you." Emperor Manicore dropped to his knees in the mud. The absolute ruler of the vampire empire bowed his head to the ground before me. "I know," he said hoarsely. "You were told your power was a defect. You were kept in a cage and told it was for your own safety. That was my failure." I staggered back, clutching my stomach as the second heartbeat surged. Who are you?" Manicore looked up. Tears streamed freely down his face, unguarded and unashamed. "I am your father," he said. and I have been searching for you for 22 years. The bloodstone in the Emperor's staff flared violently, answering the child inside me with perfect living rhythm. Thump, thump. I gasped as warmth flooded me, a presence I had never known, a strength that did not demand anything from me. For the first time in my life, the burning pain eased. It didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a crown. Manticore rose slowly, careful and reverent. He wrapped me gently into his arms, shielding me from the rain, from the world. You are not a burden, he whispered fiercely against my hair. You never were. The sickness they told you about. It was your sovereignty trying to breathe. I sagged into him, the coldness of the last 3 years finally beginning to thaw. Father, I whispered, and the Emperor held me as if he would never let go. I looked back toward the council chambers, where Valeria was currently signing away my life, thinking he had finally rid himself of a broken dreg. He didn't know that the defect he discarded was the only thing that could have saved his house from the storm that was coming. The interior of the Imperial limousine was a world away from the cold, damp alley mud. The seats were upholstered in the softest crimson silk, and the air was filtered and warm, smelling of sandalwood. Beside me sat the high primal Manticore, the man who claimed to be my father. His hand, ancient and crackling with a terrifying power, remained firmly on my shoulder. It wasn't a grip. It was a conduit. I could feel a steady stream of pure, sovereign energy flowing from him into me, finally stabilizing the frantic violet fire that had been trying to tear my veins apart. The seal is broken, the Emperor murmured, his voice sounding like the low rumble of a distant storm. To think you were living as a contract asset in the house of a minor lord. I looked down at my hands. They were no longer shaking. My skin seemed to have a faint inner glow, like fine porcelain lit from within. I don't understand, I whispered. I was told I was a dreg. I was told my soul was too thin to stay anchored to this world without Valeria's help. They lied to keep you small, he said, his eyes flashing with a dangerous violet light. 22 years ago, during the purge, your mother used her final breath to cast a sanguine curse on you and your brother. It suppressed your essence and masked your scent, making you appear as dregs to hide you from our enemies. We thought we had lost you both forever. My brother, I gasped, sitting up despite the ache in my core. Darius, we were told we were both defective. He was being held in a hospice on the other side of the city. Valeria. Lord Valyria promised that as long as I served him, he would provide the anchor energy to keep Darius's heart from stopping. The Emperor's grip on my shoulder tightened, and the temperature in the car dropped. Lord Valyria did not save your brother, Enrick. He was unknowingly keeping an Imperial general in a cage. Your brother was never sick. He was suffocating because his sovereign blood was trying to scream through a dreg's shell. By now, my paladins have already seized that hospice. Darius will awaken tonight, and so will you. The Obsidian Palace was a fortress carved from the heart of a mountain, a place of shadows and gold. I was carried inside by General Kalen, my eldest brother. He looked down at me with a fierce, protective pride that made me feel safe for the first time in my life. In the Imperial Healer's chamber, surrounded by basins of restorative oils, I underwent the Great Awakening. As the healers chanted in a forgotten tongue, I felt my dreg shell, the weakness, the fatigue, the constant shame, simply melting away. My features sharpened, my senses heightened until I could hear the heartbeat of the guards outside the heavy stone doors. But the biggest change was the child. The healer, an ancient woman named Arau, gasped as she held a crystal over my stomach. The Heir. He is responding to the Imperial frequency. My lord, the child is a true-born primal. Because Enrick is a royal, the child has inherited the full weight of the throne. I looked at the glowing violet seal on my skin. I wasn't just a father. I was carrying the future of an empire. And the father? The emperor asked, his voice cold. The lord who discarded my son like an outdated ledger? The bond is stretching, the healer said, looking at the mark on my neck, the mark Valeria had placed there. Lord Valyria will be feeling the strain. He will be feeling the phantom pain of a bond that is too small for the soul it's trying to hold. The suppression curse he called an anchor is now a noose. Meanwhile, at the high sanguine convocation, Lord Valyria stood at a black marble podium, his expression tense and efficient. Beside him was Lord Heir, serving as a political guarantor. To Valeria, this was a night of relief. He had filed the paperwork to erase Enrick, the defective asset, from his life. He believed he had traded a dreg's weakness for a political strength. The filing is complete, Valeria told the council scribe, his voice cold. The fringe blood contract is dissolved. House Vane is now merged with the Southern Coven. But as he spoke, he clutched the edge of the podium. A sharp, stinging pain erupted in his neck. He reached for the bond, expecting to feel my usual submission or quiet sadness. Instead, he felt silence. A cold, vast, and terrifying silence. And then, a pulse of power so immense that it knocked the breath from his lungs. It didn't feel like a dreg. It felt like the roar of a sun. Valeria arrived at the clinic an hour later, storming past the nurses. "Where is he?" he roared at Dr. Thomas. "Where is Enrick?" The doctor looked at him with a mix of fear and pity. "He's gone, Lord Valyria. You sent a prince to a clinic for outcasts. You filed a document to erase the third star of the Empire so you could satisfy a voting audit. The Emperor's convoy took him. They know, Valyria. They know you used a suppression curse to keep him silent." Valeria stumbled back, the marriage mark on his neck cracking until a thin line of blood trickled down his collar. He ran back to his manor, but the gates were gone, his guards paralyzed by an Imperial aura. In our bedroom, the room where he had treated me like furniture for 3 years, he found my to-do list. Prepare Valeria's morning tea. Polish the silver brooch. Tell Valeria about the heartbeat. The last line was crossed out. He sank to the floor, the paper crushing in his fist. He realized then that he had had the greatest power in the world in his house, and he had traded it for a voting block and a lie. 1 week later, the Obsidian Palace. I stood on the training balcony, my long violet robes billowing in the wind. I no longer walked with the slumped shoulders of a servant. I moved with the lethal elegance of a predator. "I heard the news," a voice said behind me. I turned and smiled. My brother Darius was standing there, no longer the sickly boy I had spent 3 years trying to save, but a towering figure of imperial power, his eyes burning with the same violet fire as mine. "House Vane is in chaos," Darius said, his voice deep and resonant. "The council has frozen Valeria's assets. His registry filing is considered fraudulent because he failed to declare the presence of a sovereign prince." I touched the mark on my neck. It was no longer a silver scar. It was a deep violet seal of the Imperial house. "He tried to use the law to erase me," I said, my voice carrying a weight that made the air itself vibrate. "Now the law will be the thing that buries him." "What will you do?" Darius asked. I looked out over the mountains toward the city where the emergency sanguine tribunal would soon meet. "The council has summoned him to explain my disappearance," I said. "He thinks he's going there to argue a legal point. I am going to attend that tribunal, but I am not going as a witness." I turned back to the horizon, a dark, regal fire in my eyes. I am going as the Imperial auditor. I want to see the look on Valeria's face when he realizes that the dreg he deleted from his life is now the judge who will decide if his house is allowed to exist. The night of the emergency sanguine tribunal arrived, but there was no music, no dancing, and no diamonds. I stood in the heart of the council war chamber, a place of cold basalt and silent, watchful gargoyles. The air was heavy with the smell of ozone and old parchment. This was not a celebration. It was a lockdown. I stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror in the preparation room. 2 Imperial attendants moved like ghosts behind me, fastening a heavy midnight violet cloak over my shoulders. Beneath it, the black chrome armor of an Imperial prince felt like a second skin. I looked at my reflection. The sunken cheeks and the hollow, haunted eyes of the Mpreg were gone. My skin had a faint, iridescent shimmer, and my eyes, now a permanent glowing violet, held a clarity that felt like it could pierce through the thickest shadow. I wasn't just a fringe blood anymore. I was a storm held in a sovereign shape. "The surge is intensifying," my father's voice echoed. The Emperor entered the room and placed his hand on my stomach. I felt my child pulse in response, a vibrant electric rhythm that vibrated against his palm. He knew where we were. He was reacting to the ancient architecture of his ancestors. "He is trying to claim the room," my father murmured. "He doesn't need to claim it, Father," I said. My voice was resonant, carrying a weight I had never known I possessed. "It already belongs to him." My father handed me a scepter of black glass topped with the Imperial sigil. "You do not go as a victim seeking an apology, Enrick. You go as the Imperial auditor. If Lord Valeria has falsified his registry or endangered the sovereign blood, you are the gavel." The massive iron doors of the war chamber were thrown back by a gust of violet wind. I didn't walk into that room. I descended upon it. A heavy, suffocating pressure followed my every step. I heard the herald's voice ring out, shaking the foundations of the mountain, but my eyes were locked on the pit in the center of the room. "Make way for the 3rd star of the Empire, His Imperial Highness, Prince Enrick Valerius." The room fell into a state of total shock. I watched the council elders stand in unison, bowing their heads. And there, at the center of the pit, stood Valeria. He looked pale, exhausted, and, for the first time, small. Beside him was Mir, dressed in stiff house colors, his hand resting on a stomach that I knew held nothing but air and artifice. I stopped at the edge of the pit, looking down at them. I didn't acknowledge the elders. I simply stood there, letting my violet eyes burn with a cold, unforgiving light. "Lord Valeria," I said. My voice was a command that echoed off the basalt walls. "Enrick," Valeria whispered. His legs trembled as he took an instinctive step back. "You're Imperial?" "I am the Mpreg you filed as a business loss," I replied, my words cutting through the silence like a blade. "I am the fringe blood you sent to a clinic while you signed away my life for a voting block because you thought my essence had withered." Mir stepped forward, his face twisting into a mask of desperate outrage. "This is a trick, a glamour. He was a fringe blood. He's using an illusion to stop our merger. I am the one carrying the vain heir." I didn't even look at him. I kept my gaze on the lead elder. "As Imperial Auditor, I move for a formal blood verification audit of Lord Mir. If there is a vain heir, the Imperial scepter will recognize it." Mir paled, stumbling over his words. I'm too fragile for a blood test. The stress..." "The scepter does not require blood," I said, leveling the black glass staff at him. The Imperial sigil began to glow. "It only requires truth." I unleashed a beam of violet light. It hit Mir like a physical strike. Instantly, the synthetic alchemical signature he'd used to mimic a pregnancy flickered and died. The heartbeat the council had been sensing vanished. I watched as the glamour shattered, leaving Mir's stomach flat and his face pale with terror. "I see no life inside you, Mir," I said to the dead silence of the chamber. Only a low-level enchantment and a desperate lie. The chamber erupted into chaos. Valeria turned to Mir, his eyes wide with a horror that bordered on madness. He realized then that he had destroyed his life for a counterfeit. But when he turned back to me, I knew he could finally hear it. Now that the suppression curse he had placed on me was broken, the frequency of my child finally reached him. Thump, 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 thump. You, Valeria gasped. The child. It's a pureblood. He is a prince, I said, my voice cold. And our contract is void. Not because you ended it, but because the Empire has rejected your anchor. I tossed the digital scroll of the Imperial decree into the pit. It slid across the floor until it hit Valeria's knees. House Vane is hereby stripped of its voting weight. Its assets are frozen pending a full investigation into the criminal suppression of a royal ward. Valeria watched his world crumble, but before he could speak, the room began to shake. A violent, jagged crack appeared in the floor beneath me. The child within me, reacting to the surge of emotion and the ancient stone, let out a surge of raw, unstable energy. For 22 years, my power had been bottled up behind Valeria's curse. Now it was exploding. "The prince is transitioning," my father shouted. "The energy is too high. He's going to collapse the mountain." I let out a cry of agony, dropping the scepter. The violet fire was no longer a glow. It was a physical flame licking at the air around me. My body was burning from the inside out. I looked at the elders, at the guards, and at the city beyond these walls. I have to hold it, I thought. I have to be the shield. Valeria saw the agony on my face. He saw the way the violet light was beginning to char the very air. "I can anchor the rift," Valeria shouted. He tried to break through the Imperial guards, screaming my name. "I am the biological source. My frequency can stabilize him." My brother Darius leveled his blade at Valeria's throat. "You have done enough, Vane. You were his jailer, not his savior." "If you don't let me," Valeria screamed, tears streaming down his face, "he will burn to ash to save this city. The sovereign blood is too hot for the environment. Let me help him." My eyes were burning white now. I was holding the energy of a sun in my chest, shielding the very people who had looked down on me as a dreg for 3 years. "Let him through," I heard my father command. Valeria scrambled through the rubble and the violet lightning until he reached me. He didn't just take my hand. He threw his arms around me, offering his own noble life force as a heat sink for the Imperial fire. Enrick let it flow into me. He sobbed into my shoulder. "I'm not leaving. I'll be the anchor. A real anchor this time. Just don't let go." As the black lightning of the rift arched between us, I looked into his gray eyes. The world was white. The pain was absolute. But for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't holding the weight of my own existence alone. I felt like I was dissolving into a sea of violet fire. The basalt war chamber blurred around me. The stone gargoyles on the ceiling seemed to weep as the raw power of my awakening tore through my lungs. I wasn't just holding a child. I was holding a collapsing star. I lay in Valeria's arms, my body arching as I fought to contain the blood rift. For 22 years, this power had been bottled up by his curse. Now that the lid was off, it threatened to level the city. The white light pouring from my eyes was so blinding I could only see Valeria as a dark silhouette against the brilliance. "The rift is too wide." My father's voice roared from somewhere far away. "He needs a localized frequency to bleed off the pressure, or his physical form will shatter." I felt Valeria's grip tighten. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel the cold, calculating lord who had signed my erasure. Through the fragments of our old bond, I felt something new. A total, terrifying clarity. He wasn't looking at his house's voting weight or the council's approval. He was looking at me, the person he had tried to treat as a broken tool. I won't let you shatter. He whispered against my ear, his voice trembling but steady. I will be your gravity, Enrick. I felt him lean down to the crook of my neck. I knew what he was doing. This wasn't a contract bite meant to suppress me. This was the sovereign anchor, a ritual of absolute surrender. By doing this, he was giving up his autonomy forever. To save my life, he was choosing to become my shadow. Accept the burden, he pleaded. Let it flow through me. Then he bit down. A shockwave of golden and violet light exploded behind my eyelids. I gasped as my sovereign blood, hot as sunfire, flooded into him. It should have killed a lesser noble, but he held on. He poured every ounce of his history, his noble pride, and his very soul into the bond, acting as a spiritual heat sink for the power that was killing me. Slowly, the fire receded. The agonizing pressure in my chest began to cool as Valyria absorbed the excess energy. The blood rift in the floor sealed with a thunderous crack that echoed through the mountain. My vision cleared, the white fire fading back to a soft, calm amethyst. I reached up, my hand trembling as I touched Valeria's cheek. Through the new, permanent bond, I could feel everything. I felt his genuine horror at the 3 years he spent as my jailer. I felt his absolute surrender. He wasn't my master anymore. He was my anchor. The silence in the chamber was absolute. My father stepped forward, his eyes wet with a mixture of relief and pride. He looked at the mark now glowing on my neck, the seal of a sovereign and his suppliant. The rift is closed, my father said, his voice thick. And the debt is recognized. Valeria didn't look up at the Emperor. He kept his head bowed against my shoulder, his body shaking from the strain of holding my power. I didn't do it for the debt, Your Majesty, he whispered, and I felt the truth of it vibrate through our shared blood. I did it because the stars have no meaning without the sky. 3 months later, the northern sanctuaries. The Empire is different now. House Vane is a name in the history books, stripped of its power after the investigation into Mir's fraud and Valeria's criminal suppression of my bloodline. Valeria didn't fight the charges. He voluntarily resigned his lordship and handed the keys of his estate to the crown as penance. We live now in a quiet, elegant villa on the edge of the Imperial palace grounds. I am the prince. He is my consort suppliant. Every morning, I wake to the sound of him moving quietly through the kitchen. He doesn't have a staff. He refused them. He does the work himself. I walked into the kitchen today, draped in heavy fur robes. I am heavily pregnant now, and I can feel the child's power thrumming in harmony with the mountains outside. The tea is ready, Enrick, Valeria said. He bowed his head, not waiting for a command. He set the cup on the table and stepped back, keeping his eyes respectfully lowered. I sat down and took a sip. It was perfect. Mountain tea, with a pinch of cinnamon. The same draft I used to prepare for him while my soul was withering. I watched him stoke the hearth. His expensive silks are gone, replaced by sturdy wool. His hands, which used to hold only wine and authority, are calloused from the gardens. The council sent a message, I said softly. Mir has been exiled to the borderlands. The fraud charges were upheld. Valeria didn't look up from the fire. He was a shadow I chose because I was afraid of the sun. I do not care where the wind blows him. They also asked if you wanted to petition for the restoration of your title, I added. Valeria finally stopped. He looked at me, the firelight reflecting in those gray eyes that once looked at me with such clinical coldness. I spent 3 years treating you as a transaction, Enrick. I do not want a title. I want to be the man who ensures you never feel the cold of that clinic again. Every meal I cook is my true petition. He walked over and knelt at my feet. He didn't reach for me. He waited, as he always does now, for my permission. "The baby is active today," I said. I took his hand and placed it on my stomach. The child kicked instantly, a strong, vibrant greeting to the man who now grounds his power. I felt Valeria's breath hitch through our bond. "He has your strength," he whispered. "And he will have a father who finally knows that true power is found in the service of the soul," I replied. 5 years later. The Imperial courtyard. The Obsidian Palace is no longer a place of war and basalt. It is a place of jasmine and laughter. I stood on the balcony today, watching a small boy run through the grass with a wooden sword. He has messy black hair and eyes that shift between Valeria's gray and my violet. "I am the High Guard," my son Julian shouted. "I am the defender of the star." "Then keep your guard up, Julian," a voice laughed. I watched Valyria walk across the grass. He looks younger now, more at peace than he ever was as a lord. He lifted Julian onto his shoulders, spinning him around. "I am the Imperial Regent now. My authority is undisputed. But here, in this garden, I am just a man watching his family." Valeria looked up and saw me. In front of the guards and the visiting dignitaries, he pressed his hand to his heart and bowed deeply. It wasn't the bow of a subject to a king. It was the bow of a man who had finally found his home. The story of the Cold Lord and the Mpreg servant ended 5 years ago in the fire of the war chamber. This is the story of the Imperial Star and his anchor. I've learned that true power isn't found in a council vote or a suppression curse. It's found in the warmth of a shared soul, the courage to change, and the quiet, cinnamon-scented mornings of a life I finally own. And that is the story of how a Mpreg in the kitchen became the regent on the throne, and how a Lord of Shadow finally found the light. It turns out, the most dangerous thing you can do is mistake a sleeping king for a broken tool. Valeria learned that true nobility isn't found in a title, but in the calluses on a servant's hands. And Enrick? Enrick learned that his sickness was actually his crown trying to grow. Their bond might have started as a cold, legal cage, but it ended with a connection that rewrote the laws of the Empire. Thank you so much for listening to the complete story of the Sanguine Secret, the Emperor's lost heir. I hope you enjoyed Enrick's journey from the rainy alleys of betrayal to the golden halls of the Obsidian Palace. If you loved seeing Enrick finally claim his violet fire and watching Valeria earn his redemption, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is the energy that keeps the stories alive here at Ether Audio. I want to know your thoughts. If you were Enrick, could you have forgiven Valyria for the years of suppression, or was his service as a consort suppliant the only way to balance the scales? And what hidden power or royal betrayal story should we dive into next? Let me know in the comments below. I'm Ether. Remember, you don't need a lord to anchor you. You just need the courage to let your own light burn. See you in the next story. Bye.